Hello, and welcome to Sophia's Roulette. I'm Cynthia Leonard, and tonight we have the amazing and brilliant Dr. Tamana Khosla, author of The Feminist Manifesto and China, India, Russia, Rise of the Euro-Asian Civilization, professor, feminist, and individualist. And tonight the topic will be of totalitarianism. Tamana, if you would like to introduce yourself and maybe just dive into the lecture, that would be fantastic. I'm so excited.
Yeah. Thanks, Cynthia, for the introduction. Very kind introduction. Today, I'm going to speak about totalitarianism. And it's a very important topic right now because we are facing a lot of totalitarianism, not just in non-democratic countries, but also democratic countries. So, what is the nature of these totalitarianism in democratic countries? We don't need to discuss non-democratic countries because we know what's going on there. But what's going on in democratic countries like US, UK, India, etc., we really need to understand that particular aspect. And that's what I'm going to point out at right now. So the ethics of totalitarianism, I have titled it as Totalitarianism, Surveillance, and State of Orwellianism, the need for individual rights and true form of liberal democracy. So what the gist of my thing is that, we need more of privacy, which is, like nowhere now seen in the world, because there's so much of surveillance and, the technology has increased so much that, privacy is nowhere to be seen, be it China, be it US. So, yeah. So the present state of world has become largely Orwellian. If one were to unearth, it would seem more totalitarian than democratic. The adjective Orwellian connotes an attitude and a policy of control by propaganda, surveillance, misinformation, denial of truth, and manipulation of the past. In 1984, Orwell described totalitarian government that controlled thought by controlling language, making certain ideas literally unthinkable. Several words and phrases from 1984 have entered popular language. For example, newspeak. Newspeak is a simplified and obfuscatory language designed to make independent thought impossible. Because, if we look at Assange or if we look at Snowden, what were they doing? So, I'm going to discuss them at large. But like here, I just wanted to tell you that independent thought has become almost impossible to have. And anybody who does that, is behind bars. So doublethink means holding two contradictory beliefs simultaneously. The thought police. The thought police are those who suppress all dissenting opinion. So, the normal, this is what's happening in China right now. China is like, the thought police is majorly, controlling the thought of people, and, like they have their own technologies, Facebook, etc. are not there, and, they have their own, and they keep record of the people's personal data, etc. So, yeah. Orwell emphasized that superficial literature, film, and music used to control and indoctrinate the populace through docility. Big Brother is a supreme dictator who watches everyone. So Big Brother, and that's the serial's name, and that's what's really is happening. The Big Brother is watching you. They're like watching you all the time, your homes, everywhere. If people came to know today, there would be a revolution. Just like French Revolution, people would revolt against, but people just don't know that they are being surveillance like this. If they really did know, I'm sure there would be another third revolution. After Renaissance, I guess this would be a new revolution which will take place, where people will take charge in their own hands. It would be more platonic, and people having the wise men taking over, and like fools, who most politicians are, and uh, most power driven they are. And so that's what they are doing right now. They're just critically watching people and controlling their thought process, and how to, and media is playing a big role in that particular aspect, how to um, do this. So now let's look at the history of mass surveillance. By the early decades of 20th century, the US Bureau of Investigation, the precursor of today's FBI, was using wiretapes along with mail monitoring and informants to clamp down on opposed to American government policies. So let's look at America first. No matter the specific techniques involved, historically, mass surveillance has had several constant attributes. Initially, it is always the country's dissidents and marginalized who bear the brunt of the surveillance, leading those who support the government or are merely apathetic to mistakenly believe they are immune. So, people feel that they're immune from being watched, but that's not really happening. Everybody is being watched, and it's dangerous. It's scary. I mean, if you really understand what's going on, it's just almost impossible to understand, how nobody is immune from, only people in power, behind the doors, they can do anything. But after several years, the history repeats itself, and their histories come out. For example, many in India also, many stories of politicians came out after they were not in the seat of power. So yeah. And history shows that mere existence of mass surveillance apparatus, regardless of how it is used, is in itself sufficient to stifle dissent. A citizenry that is aware of always being watched quickly becomes a compliant and fearful one. So they become compliant, and they are fearful one too. What to do? They just don't know what's happening. It is found that the agency had labeled 500,000 US citizens as potential subversives, routinely spying on people based purely on their political beliefs. The FBI's list of targets ranged from Martin Luther King to John Lennon, from the women's liberation movement to the anti-communist John Birch Society. On the contrary, mass surveillance is a universal temptation for any unscrupulous power. And in every instance, the motive is the same: suppressing dissent and mandating compliance. At the turn of the 20th century, the British and the French empires both created specialized monitoring departments to deal with the threat of anti-colonialist movement. The ability to eavesdrop on people's communication vests immense power in those who do it. And unless such power is held in check by rigorous oversight and accountability, it is almost certain to be abused. Expecting the US government to operate a massive surveillance machine in complete secrecy without falling prey to its temptations runs counter to every historical example and all available evidence about human nature. So how do governments silence whistleblowers? The two most favored lines of whistleblowers demonization is he is unstable and he is naive. Demonizing the personality of anyone who challenges political power has been a long-standing tactic used by Washington. In fact, Cynthia, I would like to say that, I don't know what you think. The new technology of, the new profession which has now come into being, of psychiatry, I guess they play a lot of role in this particular aspect, where they look at us, they kind of sum them up, sum the person who is anti-state as somebody who is against the state and has some psychological problem. So, so I mean, everything has pros, it's got pros and cons. It can be a disease, it can improve somebody's disease, but it can also lead to suppression of dissent, because the person has been labeled as a psycho. So I guess that is a very dangerous situation, that anybody can be termed as a mental patient. This is very dangerous. I'm like really scared about this thing. Like any opponent of the state, is labeled as a mental, a mental or a drug addict, for example. These things are very common. The anybody who is like against the state is termed as mental addict, or drug addict. So yeah, demonizing and personality of anyone who challenges political power has been a long tactic of Washington, including by the media. One of the first and perhaps most glaring examples of tactic was the Nixon administration's treatment of Pentagon Papers whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg, which included breaking into the office of the Ellsberg psychoanalyst to steal Ellsberg's files and pry into his sexual history. The same tactic was used to damage Julian Assange's reputation well before he was accused of sex crimes by two women in Sweden. Notably, the attack on Assange were carried out by the same newspapers that had worked with him and had benefited from Chelsea Manning's disclosure, which Assange and WikiLeaks had enabled. Casting Assange as crazy and delusional became a staple of US political discourse generally, and the New York Times tactically specifically. The Times also led the way on the Manning coverage, insisting that what drove Manning to become a massive whistleblower was not conviction or conscience, but personality disorder and psychological instability. So this is what I'm trying to say, that psychiatrists can be a very dangerous profession if used by the state. Attributing dissent to personality disorder is hardly an American invention. Soviet dissidents were routinely institutionalized in psychological hospitals, and Chinese dissidents are still often forcibly treated for mental illness. There are obvious reasons for launching personal attacks on critics of status quo. As noted, one is to render the critic less effective. Few people want to align themselves with someone crazy or weird, so their career is doomed. Anybody who is termed as a mental patient is the career is totally doomed. There are obvious reasons for launching personal attacks on critics of the status quo. As noted, one is to render the critic less effective. Few people want to align themselves with someone crazy or weird. Another is deterrence. When dissidents are cast out of society and demeaned as emotionally imbalanced, others are given strong incentive not to become one. The administration has waged what people across the political spectrum were calling an unprecedented war on whistleblowers. The president, who had campaigned on a war to have the most transparent administration in history, specifically pledging to protect whistleblowers, whom he hailed as noble and courageous, had done exactly the opposite. Obama's administration has prosecuted more government leakers under the Espionage Act of 1917, a total of 7, than all previous administrations in UN history combined. In fact, more than double the total. The Espionage Act was adopted during World War I to enable Woodrow Wilson to criminalize dissent against the war, and its sanctions were severe. They included life in prison and even death penalty. Just weeks before my arrival in Hong Kong, it was revealed that the Obama Justice Department had obtained a court order to read through the emails and telephone records of reporters and editors from the Associated Press to find the source of the story. Almost immediately after that, a new report revealed an even more extreme attack on news gathering process. The Department of Justice had filed a court affidavit accusing Fox News Washington Bureau Chief James Rosen of being a co-conspirator in his source alleged crimes on the ground that the journalist had aided and abetted the source disclosure of classified information by working with him closely to receive the materials. You would basically be instructed not to worry about it, he said. He developed a reputation among colleagues as someone who raised too many concerns, a trait that did not endear him to superiors. But then it became clear that Obama was not just continuing, but in many cases expanding these abuses. And now Snowden also, Edwin Snowden says, I could watch drones in real times as they surveilled the people they might kill. You could watch entire village and see what everyone was doing. I watched NSA, this is what Snowden is saying. I watched NSA tracking people, internet activities as they type. This is just amazing, as you're typing, you're being watched. Every word you're typing, you're being watched. Where do you emphasize? Where do you stop? Everything is being watched. How dangerous is this? I mean, it's like really, if people were to become aware today, they would become totally hysterical that, their basic privacy is not being protected. Whatever they want to do, everything is being watched by the government. And, business, government, and criminal nexus. So, so Snowden says, I became aware of just how invasive US surveillance capability had become. I realized that true breadth of the system and almost knob. True measurement of a person's worth isn't what they say they believe in, but what they do in defense of those beliefs. He said, if you are not acting on your beliefs, then they probably aren't real. What keeps a person passive and compliant, he explained, is fear of repercussions. But once you let go of your attachment to things that don't ultimately matter, money, career, physical safety, you can overcome that fear. So that's what he overcame, that fear. Further, newspapers like Washington Post, excessive closeness to government, reverence for the institution of national security state, routine exclusion of dissenting voices. The paper's own media critic, Howard Kurtz, had documented in 2004 how the paper had systematically amplified pro-war voices in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq while downplaying on excluding opposition. The Post was largely one-sided in terms of reporting against Iraq. So, this is what is the totalitarianism as far as in democracies are concerned. And the 2008 FISA Amendment Act is the current governing law for NSA surveillance. The documents left no doubt that NSA was equally involved in economic espionage, diplomatic spying, and suspicionless surveillance aimed at entire population. The US government had built a system that has as its goals the complete elimination of electronic privacy worldwide. Far from hyperbole, that is literal, explicitly stated aim of surveillance state to collect, store, monitor, and analyze all electronic communication by all people across the globe. Internet companies to provide access to all the communications of any non-American, including those with US persons, Facebook chats, Yahoo emails, Google searches. Point was clear. If you can ever evade the watchful eyes of supreme authority, there is no choice but to follow the diktats that authority imposes. You cannot even consider forging your own path beyond those rules. If you believe you are always being watched and judged, you are not really free individual. All oppressive authorities, political, religious, societal, parental, rely on this vital truth, using it as a principal tool to enforce orthodoxies, compel adherence, and quash dissent. What made the internet so appealing was precisely that it afforded the ability to speak and act anonymously, which is so vital to individual exploration. For that reason, it is the realm of privacy where creativity, dissent, and challenges to orthodoxy germinate. What makes a surveillance system effective in controlling human behavior is the knowledge that one's words and actions are susceptible to monitoring. But mass surveillance kills dissent in deeper and more important place as well, in the mind. And that's what Orwell also said. Those two people were being watched continuously, and that is what is he predicted it back then. And this is what is really happening now. White and Zimbardo noted in their conclusion that threat or actuality of government surveillance may psychologically inhibit freedom of speech. They added that while their research design did not allow for the possibility of avoiding assembly, they expected that the anxiety generated by the threat of surveillance cheerleaders essentially offers only one argument in defense of mass surveillance. It is only carried out to stop terrorism and keep people safe. Indeed, invoking an external threat is a historical tactic of choice to keep the population submissive to government power surveillance, which would cause people to avoid such situations. So, scaring people that, this is terrorism and, we have to look into the whole situation, to keep people, to shut them out, that the government is doing good for them. So privacy is, I guess we need to move forward, and a democracy which is more privacy driven should be there. And otherwise democracy has no value. What value do we have if people do not have privacy and individual rights, to write, to say something? Most of these Western countries, for example, they blame Middle Eastern countries that they do not provide privacy to women, for example. They do not provide any kind of like they can't write anything against Quran, for example, etc., etc. But what are they doing in their country? We need to question that also. Democracy, a population, a country that venerates physical safety above all other values, will ultimately give up its liberty and sanctions any power seized by authority in exchange for the promise, no matter how illusionary, of total security. However, absolute safety is itself chimeric, pursued by but never obtained. The pursuit degrades those who engage in it, as well as any nation that comes to be defined by it. While the government via surveillance knows more and more about what its citizens are doing, its citizens know less and less about what their government is doing, shielded as it is by a wall of secrecy. In a healthy democracy, the opposite is true. Democracy requires accountability and consent of governed, which is only possible if citizens know what is being done in their name. And the presumption is that, with rare exception, they will know everything their political officials are doing, which is why they are called public servants, working in public sector in public service for public agencies. Conversely, the presumption is that the government, with rare exception, will not know anything that law-abiding citizens are doing. That is why we are called private individuals, functioning in our private capacity. Transparency is for those who carry out public duties, and exercise public power. Privacy is for everyone. So, just to conclude, privacy is as important as individual rights. The point is not the hypocrisy of those who disparage the value of privacy while intensely safeguarding their own, although that is striking. It is that the desire for privacy is shared by us all as an essential, not ancillary, part of what it means to be human. We all instinctively understand that the private realm is where we can act, think, speak, write, experiment, and choose how to be, away from judgmental eyes of others. Privacy is a core condition of being a free person. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamana. I love the way that you connected it to mental health, because you're so right. First of all, we're living in a loony bin. So who are these people to say that other people are crazy? And
Yeah.
to speak to the surveillance you mentioned, yes, they not only do they know every word we type, but they know every word we speak. If you carry a phone around with you, like there's somebody listening all the time.
Yes.
So and I do have some other stuff to add on, but I'm going to save that for the question and answer period. But how do you feel about it?
I guess, I mean, I'm really concerned about this particular aspect, that people worldwide are not able to practice privacy of their own, they can't, within their own homes, they are not safe. So, like countries such as US, France, Britain, which have been, known for bringing about these kind of thoughts, such as liberty, privacy, freedom, etc., are themselves flouting them. So, what are they going to, preach to other countries which are like developing right now?
Right.
How would you kind of tell them that you should maintain, you should give privacy to your people, and so I guess technology is something which is it is good also, and it has its bad points also, drones, etc., that is what they're doing right now.
Mhm.
I mean, looking at the whole perspective of people's uh, doing a certain act is being watched by everybody, like the senior, how Osama got killed, so I mean, I'm not supporting him, but I'm just saying that, like the way the Obama government, looked at the whole situation, and they were sitting in their Oval Office, and how they targeted him. So, but that is another issue. I'm just pointing out the thing that people are not safe. People have to, like everybody is like in an unsafe zone, because everybody is being watched constantly. It's only very few people who would be able to evade that, probably the most powerful ones, but the ones who have rich money and contacts. But I guess even their stories would be out after certain 50 years or something, so I guess that's the whole thing. Yeah, Cynthia.
And isn't it interesting, because you were talking about how they make people seem like they're unreasonable, they're mentally ill, so they're basically using the same argument against them that they've been using against women in our society for generations.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
hysterical, you're unreasonable, you're crazy. When you were talking about how surveillance would get to a point where eventually the people would revolt,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I would say we're already past that point.
yeah.
So, do you anticipate some sort of catalyst that might snap people out of it, or do you think
Yes,
something catastrophic is going to happen?
I guess, Cynthia, because even now we have many movements like the leftist movement, the climate movement, these kind of movements, which are like radical movements right now, you
Mhm.
know, and they are the ones who are like, even though I'm not talking about the climate movement, but the leftist movement itself is a very closed movement. But despite that, they have been revolting,
Mhm.
against such a system.
Mhm.
So, many Marxists, for example, or many environmental related workers, like they have that, they have crossed that bridge, where they have been bringing out these issues in public, that, this is what is happening. But, they are being targeted because, they are not in power right now. Greta Thunberg, all these people, they have been speaking about climate changes, and but many of the countries, developed countries, are not listening to people who are like talking about climate changes, etc. So I guess that is the whole problem right now.
Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up like I'm a professional and tell you how much I love you and how very grateful I am that you were willing to do this today.